Imagine someone invents a new health technology. Maybe it could detect disease early. Maybe it could help someone with dementia remain independent for longer. Maybe it could save nurses hours of repetitive work every week. Researchers build it, they test it, the early results look promising. They might even secure government funding to develop it further. And then it disappears. No hospital adopts it, no care service buys it. Most patients never even know it existed. You might assume the technology simply didn't work, but that isn't always what happened. A 2024 review by researchers at the University of Twente in the Netherlands describes a phenomenon in health innovation known as the Valley of Death. Actually, they describe two of them. The first lies between scientific research and turning that research into commercially viable technology. The second comes after commercialization, between getting something to market and achieving widespread sustained use. And that raises an uncomfortable possibility. We may be losing technologies that could genuinely help people, not necessarily because the technology failed, but because nobody successfully built the bridge between research and reality. Chapter 1. Building it might be the easy part. Think about how we imagine a normal technology startup. You have an idea, you build a minimum viable product, you put it in front of users, they hate half of it, you change it. Eventually, if people want it, you demonstrate traction, raise investment, and try to scale. Obviously, normal startups are incredibly difficult, but health technology can inherit all of those normal startup problems and then add another stack on top. Depending on what you've built, you may need clinical evidence, regulatory approval, information governance, health economic evidence, integration with existing healthcare systems, a reimbursement strategy, procurement approval, and after all of that, you still need someone to actually use it. The UK's Medicine and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the MHRA, regulates medical devices. Depending on the technology and its regulatory route, developers may need conformity assessment, registration, and potentially clinical investigations to generate the evidence required to bring a device to market. Those requirements exist for a very good reason. If Spotify recommends a song you don't like, you skip it. If a medical technology makes a wrong decision, the consequences could be much more serious. So, regulation isn't the villain here. The problem is that proving something is safe, effective, and economically worthwhile requires time, expertise, and money. And that creates our first valley. Chapter 2. Valley 1. When research has to become a business. In 2022, researchers Paul Elwood, Sari Williams, and John Egan published a fascinating study. They followed six technology development projects attempting to cross the valley of death. And what they found challenges the idea that you simply invent something, prove it works, and then commercialize it. They identified five different processes happening across the valley. Teams had to refine what the technology actually was, technologically evaluate it, understand how people would really use it, work out its comparative value, and somehow combine the perspectives of scientists, clinicians, commercial partners, and others into something capable of attracting further investment. And these things didn't happen neatly, one after another. They interacted. A conversation with clinicians might change the technology, they might change the clinical trial, they might change the economics, which might change the commercial proposition. One project in the study developed a medical imaging technology. Building the technology was only part of the journey. The team also involved a clinician, conducted health economic analysis, developed the user interface, considered regulatory requirements, and eventually tested a prototype clinically. Only after these different pieces came together did the project secure its next round of funding. So, crossing the valley isn't simply does the technology work, it's can everything around the technology work too? And this is where health innovation encounters a strange funding problem. Chapter 3. The Funding Paradox. Academic research funding is very good at answering research questions. That is what it's designed to do. But the 2024 University of Twente review highlights a problem. The authors described how, in some academic projects, the technology can effectively reach the end of its journey when the research journey ends. The grant has been spent, the academic outputs have been produced, and the researchers move on. But the technology may only just be approaching the expensive part: clinical validation, regulation, commercial development, market access, and implementation. The UK's own research funding system recognizes this gap. An evaluation of the Medical Research Council translational funding describes programs specifically intended to help bridge the valley of death between discovery, science, and eventual health and economic benefit. And the 2024 UK Research and Innovation Evaluation describes a funding gap between proof of concept and the point where innovators have validated their business models and value propositions. Think about the paradox that this creates. You need money to generate evidence, but an investor may want evidence before giving you money. You need real world adoption to demonstrate commercial traction, but a healthcare organization may want evidence, regulatory clarity, and strong economic case before adopting you. So you can find yourself in an uncomfortable position: too commercial for research funding, too early or risky for some investors, and too unproven for healthcare procurement. There are programs specifically designed to bridge parts of this funding, but the fact that we need specialized translational funding in the first place tells us something important. There is a missing bridge between this is promising research and this is an investable, adoptable product. Chapter 4: When Your Survival Depends on Funding. I've experienced some of this uncertainty myself. While developing my own health technology, I was fortunate to secure multiple highly competitive government funded grants. So I've seen how valuable this funding can be. It allows us to develop technology, collaborate with researchers and care organizations, and test ideas in the real world. But I've also experienced how unpredictable competitive innovation funding can be. On one application, my project team included expertise spanning machine learning, dementia and social care, NHS dementia services, and decades of health promotion experience. When I later requested a breakdown of the assessments, I found something extraordinary. The unweighted assessor totals range from 11 to 53. On three questions, including one assessing the team, one assessor awarded scores of 1. Another assessor gave the same question scores of 9. Innovate UK identified and removed one outlier assessment under its process, but the revised overall score still remained below the funding threshold. I'm not telling you this to argue that one assessor was right and another was wrong. The interesting question is bigger. What happens when the survival of an innovation can depend on evaluations that differ that dramatically? Funding bodies have a genuinely difficult job. They receive more promising applications than they have possible funding. Somebody has to make decisions under uncertainty. But for the company, on the other hand, of that decision, losing one grant doesn't necessarily mean try again next month. It can mean losing researchers, losing momentum, losing access to clinical partners, or simply running out of money before the next opportunity appears. And remember, the technology itself hasn't necessarily failed. The company may simply have failed to survive long enough to prove whether it could succeed. Chapter 5: You've crossed the valley. But imagine you survive all of that. You raise the money, you generate the evidence, you navigate the regulatory pathway, you commercialize the product. Congratulations, you've crossed the valley of death. Except there's another one. The University of Twente Review calls this Valley of Death number 2, the gap between commercialization and widespread sustained implementation. Because being allowed to sell something doesn't mean anyone will buy it, and someone buying it doesn't mean anyone will use it, and someone using it in one hospital doesn't mean another hospital can easily do the same. This is where health technology collides with reality. Who pays? Which budget does it come from? Does adopting it save money for the organization that has to pay for it? Does it integrate with existing systems? Does it require staff training?
Does it create extra work before it saves work? Who is responsible if something goes wrong? Does it fit into clinical workflow? These aren't small details, they are the product. The NHS itself effectively acknowledges this adoption gap. NHS England has a policy called MedTech Funding Mandate, designed to accelerate access to selected technologies that NICE has found to be clinically effective and capable of delivering cost savings within specified criteria. Think about what that means. A technology can already have evidence, it can already have demonstrated clinical value, it can already have demonstrated an economic use, and we may still need a specific national mechanism to help it achieve implementation, adoption, and spread. Crossing the first valley gets you to market. It doesn't guarantee anyone builds a road from the market into healthcare. Chapter 6. What does failure actually mean? And this changes how we should think about failed health technologies, because there are at least three very different ways something can fail. First, technical failure. The technology simply doesn't work. Those failures are necessary. We want ineffective technologies to disappear. But then there's implementation failure. The technology works, but it doesn't fit the healthcare system around it. And finally, commercial failure. The technology may work, people may even want it, but nobody finds a sustainable way to fund, sell, implement, and scale it. These failures can look identical from the outside. The company disappears, the website shuts down, the technology vanishes. We assume, I guess it wasn't very good. But we don't actually know that. Elwood and his colleagues found that even with government funding and expert support, crossing the valley remained complex because technical development was only one part of the process. And the University of Twente researchers argue that successful health innovation requires innovators to think simultaneously about users, safety, legal requirements, evidence, economics, and the business model. A brilliant invention can fail if one of these pieces is missing. Chapter 7. So, how do we build a bridge? The solution isn't simply give every health tech startup more money. Bad ideas should fail. And healthcare needs high standards precisely because vulnerable people's lives may depend on these technologies. Instead, the research suggests something more fundamental. We need to stop thinking invent first, implement later. The 2024 University of Twente review identifies 5 areas innovators need to think about. In plain English, do people actually need it? Can we use it safely and legally? Can we prove that it works? Does the economic case make sense? And is there a sustainable way to deliver and pay for it? But the crucial insight is when you answer those questions, not after you spent 3 years building the technology. From the beginning, Elwood's study found something remarkably similar. The successful journey wasn't a straight line from laboratory to market. Technical development, understanding users, assessing value, and building the commercial proposition continually informed each other. And policymakers increasingly recognize that fragmentation too. NHS England has explored a more integrated medtech pathway intended to create greater clarity around evaluation and adoption rather than leaving innovators to navigate disconnected stages independently. So perhaps the bridge across the valley of death isn't one enormous check. It's connecting the people who currently stand on different sides of it: researchers, patients, clinicians, regulators, health economists, investors, procurement teams, and the people who will actually use the technology before the technology reaches the cliff edge. Chapter 8. RIP to the technologies we never met. There's something uncomfortable about all this. We can see the technologies that succeed. They're in hospitals, they're in care homes, we download them into our phones, we read about them in the news, but we can't see the technologies that disappeared somewhere along that journey. The dementia technology that lost its funding before a larger trial, the diagnostic that couldn't attract investment before generating enough evidence, the medical device that reached the market but never found a workable route into healthcare. Some of those technologies probably deserve to fail. That's how innovation works. But some may not have failed because the underlying idea was bad. They may have failed because they couldn't simultaneously satisfy the demands of research, regulation, investment, procurement, and real world healthcare before their time and money ran out. And that might be the real tragedy of the health tech valley of death. It isn't that bad ideas die, some should. It's that we may never know how many good ideas died with them. If you're a carer, healthcare professional, researcher, or you try to build something in health or social care, I'd be interested to know whether you've seen this happen. And if you want to explore why technologies that could genuinely help people so often struggle to make it from idea into the real world, subscribe. Because sometimes the biggest barrier to healthcare isn't inventing technology, it's getting across the valley.